Now, I wanted to give a quick explanation of what each panel contains and a brief introduction of how to use them. I'm going to go over each panel in more depth in a different video, but I wanted to give a quick explanation just so you can start getting familiar with each panel. In total, there are 5 main panels in Moho Debut: the Canvas, the Tools panel, the Timeline, the Layers panel, and the Style panel. The first panel I want to go over is the Canvas. The Canvas is where you can draw and preview your animation. Now, the first rule of Moho is that everything that is within this blue box will be in the final export of our animation, and everything outside of it will be cut off. So if I wanted to get a better example of what is going to be removed from my project when I export it, I can go to the View tab and enable Show Output Only. And this gives me a better idea of what is and isn't going to show up in my final animation. And to see the entire project, I'm going to go back to the View tab and deselect Show Output Only. The second window I wanted to go over is the Tools panel. Here is where all your drawing, rigging, and camera tools are located. Now, the important thing to know about the Tools panel is that the tools available will change depending on what layer you have selected. So if I select a bone layer, you can see that the bone tools are currently available. But if I select a vector layer, you can see that the bone tools have disappeared, but I now have access to the drawing tools. The tools available will also change if you play your animation. So right now I'm on frame 0, and I know I'm on frame 0 because it's telling me in the timeline. And if I move my playhead to frame 1, you can see that the tools have changed again. And if you find this confusing or distracting, then I recommend keeping beginner's mode on because it actually disables this. I'll go into more detail about how to use each tool in a separate video, but for now, that's all you need to know about this panel. The next panel is the Timeline. You can scrub through your project by selecting and holding the playhead, and the playhead indicates which frame you are currently viewing. So right now, I'm on frame 36, and I know this because Moho displays the frame I'm currently on in this box. I can also manually change which frame I'm on by selecting this box and entering in the frame I want to move to. So I'm going to select the box and enter in the number 8 to move my playhead to frame 8. And the box next to this actually lists the last frame in my project. So remember how in the project settings, the last frame was set to 168? Well, it's also listed here, and we can also change it as well. So I'm going to select the box and change the last frame of this project to 192. Now, if you noticed, the highlighted frames actually changed. They went from frame 1 to 168 to frame 1 to 192. This highlighted area indicates just how long our project is. And we can zoom in or out of the timeline by using the zoom buttons located on the right side of the timeline. If for some reason you can't see these buttons, then you can find them by selecting this arrow button on the left side of the timeline and enabling Timeline Options toolbar. Next, I want to show you how to play your animations. If you use the video play options in the timeline, you can play, pause, and skip forward or back a frame in your project. So notice how right now I'm on frame 8. If I push play, then the animation is going to start playing at frame 8. If I wanted to start playing at the beginning of my animation, then I have to move my playhead to frame 1 and then push play. And if I had audio in this project, then I can quickly mute it by selecting the audio button. And by now you're probably wondering what these little dots are. These little guys are keyframes, which indicate the starting and ending point of a transition, and in short, are the backbone to all your animations. Keyframes can get complicated really quickly, so they're going to need their own in-depth video explaining how to use them. And this is where I'm going to introduce the second rule of Moho. You draw, rig, and set up your animations on frame 0. This is considered your animation's default pose. If you make any changes to your drawings on any other frame, then the program is going to animate it. This also includes resizing layers as well as the colors being used. So be aware of this and always double check to make sure you are drawing on frame 0. So that's really all I have to say about the timeline, and the next thing I want to go over is the layers panel. If you ever used a digital drawing program, then this is going to look a bit familiar. Every layer you see is going to hold a piece of your drawing. So think of these layers as pieces of paper stacked on top of each other. The layers on the bottom are going to be covered by the layers on top, and the layers on top are going to be more visible because they're not being covered by another layer. And in Moho, you can tell which layer you have currently selected because it's highlighted. So if I select the background layer, I know I have it selected because it's now currently highlighted. And I can also change the order of my layers by selecting and dragging the layer. So I'm going to select this background layer and drag it so that it's my top layer. And if we look at the canvas, we can see that the background layer has now been moved to the front and is now covering all other layers. I can't even see the characters in this animation anymore. Now, if we look at the layers panel, there's a couple of buttons I want to go over. If you wanted to create a new layer, you would select the new layer button and select what type of layer you would want to make from the drop-down menu. And next to this is the duplicate layer button. If you select it, it will duplicate your layer. And next to the duplicate layer is the delete button, which will delete your entire layer. And lastly, this button with the 3 little dots will open up the layer settings. Here, you can change the layer's name, opacity, and a bunch of other settings. And all these settings are optional, so you don't have to get overwhelmed with all of them. For now, I would just use the layer settings options just to edit the names of your layers. Lastly, the styles panel is where you're going to design and recolor your shapes in your project. So here, you can change the color of your shapes, their outline, the effects being used, and you can even add brush strokes to your shape, and that's about it. This is probably going to be the easiest panel to learn. And with that, those are the 5 main panels that make up Moho Debut. Now, I'm going to show you how you can edit these 5 panels to better suit your screen size. So, if you're using Moho on a laptop, you've probably noticed that your screen is looking a bit cramped, and you can actually close unused panels to create more room on your screen. So let's say again you're using Moho on a laptop and you want a bigger view of your canvas, but you're currently not using your timeline to animate. As you can see, the timeline is taking up a large portion of our screen, and it's overall just getting in the way of us seeing the canvas. So you can hide the timeline panel by going to the Windows tab and deselecting Timeline from the drop-down menu. And now your canvas will appear larger and take up a larger space on your screen. And when you're ready to start animating, you can bring it back by going back to the Windows tab and selecting Timeline. Let's say you need your timeline opened, but you want it to appear smaller. To edit the size of a window, you need to undock it first. So to do this, go to the Windows tab and under Docking, deselect the panel you want to undock. So in this case, I'm selecting the timeline. Now I can place the timeline panel anywhere on my screen, and I can also resize it. So this is going to be extremely beneficial if you have a small screen. And just like hiding a window, you can put the panel back in its original space by going to the Window tab, going under Docking, and reselecting the panel you want to redock. So I'm again going to redock the timeline. So that's all I have for this video. Next, I'm going to show you guys how to create a project from scratch, as well as how to draw within Moho. And so with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and I hope to see you in the next video.